Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Alan with an episode of the Morlock Morning Digest. I want to thank you guys for being here with me. Please like, share, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and we'll see where this goes. Now, I've been thinking quite a bit recently, and to be honest with you, this idea isn't necessarily mine, but I'm going to expound upon it because it was interesting enough where I had to spend some time thinking about it, and the more that I did, the more I realized that we're going to give these people everything they say they want. Okay? And now let me explain. For this conversation, I want you to give NASA everything they say as truth and apply it. I want you to do the mental gymnastics of accepting that space is real and just listen and go upon the assumption that what they tell you is true as far as space existing. Now, with that being said, I want you to apply physics to what they are saying and showing you in the footage. What they are saying as far as how stuff like the ISS works. Now, physics is constant. There is no arguing with it. And that is why we are going to give them everything they say and tell them rectify it. Because once you start applying physics to stuff like the moon landing, the ISS, satellites, the moon itself, the sun, when you start applying physics to all of this, it falls apart. Now, I also want you to look at this with a logical brain. Do not let your beliefs, your thoughts, your emotions reign supreme during this discussion, okay? Just approach it with an open mindset. Now, with that being said, we are all taught that Newton's third law states, for every action, there is an opposite and equal reaction. Right. You can't argue that. They tell us that that's the case, so let's make them own it. When you're on Earth, right, and you take a drill in your hand, and you squeeze the trigger of that power drill, and it starts to spin this way, what happens? Your wrist jerks the opposite way. Newton's third law in motion. Now, the Earth's atmosphere allows you to counteract Newton's third law. Newton's third law does not reign supreme on Earth. You can feel it, you can watch it in effect, but it's not the end all be all, okay? But once you go to the moon, right, we're going to give them everything they say. Everything they say is true as far as this discussion is concerned, as far as where we're going. So the moon, according to NASA, has zero atmosphere, right? None. Zero. So, Newton's third law must not only be in effect, but it is the dominant force on the moon. There is no atmosphere to counteract Newton's third law. So for every action you make with your body, you are going to feel an opposite and equal reaction. For every bit of torque that is applied to you, you are going to feel the opposite torque in the opposite direction. So when we have this guy driving around on a moon buggy, right, that weighs, I don't know, 70 pounds probably, right? He's wearing a space suit that weighs 180 pounds plus his body weight and a 16th of the Earth's gravity, okay? When he turns that buggy at 11 miles per hour to the left, his entire body, the entire ass end of that buggy should shoot out to the right. Newton's third law not only works, but it is the dominant force on the moon. This also applies when they move their arms, or when they swing a golf club to hit a golf ball. There is no denying this, and when you watch the videos none of the maths. Not only that, right? There is no air, and there is only a 16th of Earth's gravity, right? If you watch the wheels of the moon buggy as it's spinning, the dust on the moon buggy doesn't make any sense at all. So because there's no atmosphere, when the sun hits the surface of the moon, it is going to charge the dust particles on the moon. They are either going to have a negative or a positive charge, meaning when the dust is kicked up from those mesh tires, it is either going to stick to the buggy or it is literally going to hover over the surface of the moon because it's negatively charged compared to the particles of the moon, so it's going to fucking float, right? It's going to cake into every surface on the spacesuit, and it doesn't. You see it coming off in little waves like it's airbrushed in because that's what it was. But like I said, for the sake of the argument, we're going to give them everything they say is true and apply physics to it. If what they say is true, the dust on the moon does not behave how the pictures and videos show that it should, based on physics, okay? Now, we can get off of the moon if we really want to, right? We've already blown it into pieces, but there's still one more step that we have to go over, and I think it's the most damning. Now, according to NASA, space is a near vacuum, okay? What that means is, it wants to pull everything, including your body if you were out in space. It doesn't matter what it is. It wants to separate even the space in between atoms itself to fill the void at a force of 22,000 pounds, according to NASA. With that being said, how do you put men into that environment? Put them in a spacesuit, right? Well, here's the problem. You have to put pressure inside of that spacesuit to counteract that 22,000 pounds of pull force from the near vacuum of space, right? And because the moon has no atmosphere, they're experiencing that vacuum, okay? So when they did tests to originally do the spacesuit, right, there was no air inside of the spacesuit besides a tiny bit of pressure for them to breathe, obviously. And what they soon realized is that the saliva on their tongues started boiling almost instantly, right? So what they decided to do is put 4.2 pounds of pressure per square inch inside of the spacesuit, okay? To counteract that pull force of the near vacuum of space. Now, let's apply physics. If it's 4.2 pounds of pressure per inch on the spacesuit, if you take the entire volume of the spacesuit, that is 12,000 pounds of pressure, okay, on the human body. Let's just say the human body could withstand 12,000 pounds of air pressure on it. How the hell are you moving your limbs at all without breaking every bone in your body? You're not. They should have looked like the Michelin men up there, right? So there's no way that the human body could even operate inside of a spacesuit if it's in a near vacuum being pulled on at 22,000 pounds per square inch. Makes no sense at all. Anybody that went up there and tried to do anything up there would shatter every bone in their entire body, even with articulating limbs on the suits. Okay, now we're going to go off of the moon for a minute and take a step backwards, and we're going to talk about the ISS a little bit because, again, we're going to take what they say as truth and apply physics to it and make them own it. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. You're in a tin can flying above the surface of the Earth. Now, technically, you're not outside of the Earth's atmosphere. You're still inside of the Earth's atmosphere, inside of the ISS. They're only 250 miles up. And they admit that there's atmosphere up there to the point where there's like 1 molecule of air per every square centimeter of empty space at the altitude they're falling around the Earth, according to what they say. Now, you have to ask yourself, how are they dispersing the heat coming off of these air particles that they are interacting with? And your natural argument might be, well, they're not really hitting that many air particles. And you're right. That's not the problem here. The problem is that the surface of this thing is the size of a football field. So for every square inch, they're running into at least 1 oxygen molecule, let alone whatever else is up there. And that right there transfers heat, right? A substantial amount of heat that they have to disperse. How is the ISS dispersing of this heat? Well, you can't use a radiator like you use in a car because that requires airflow over it, and we've already determined there's not enough air up there. So they're using ammonium radiators. And the problem with ammonium radiators is, once you oversaturate them in heat, they can no longer work because they're just being pumped with too much heat to disperse it, because it's based on a chemical reaction. It's not based on, airflow. But they're using ammonium radiators on the space station. Again, the math doesn't math. But you want to know the kicker? How they were controlling the radiation, right? Because that's heat radiation on the spacecraft. How they were dealing with that heat radiation on the spacesuits? They were using the same radiator that we're using in my car. And we just determined that you can't use that on the ISS. So how the hell are you using it on spacesuits? There's not enough air to make it work. Make it make sense, people. Again, we're just making them deal with what they're saying is true. And none of the math is mathing. None of it. It gets even better than that, though. So have you ever seen the experiment when they're in the ISS and they take a ball and they just start spinning it and the ball hovers, right? Just hovers in place, doesn't move, spinning in a circle. I want you to think about something. Have you ever played baseball? Do you understand how mechanics work when a pitcher throws a ball in the home plate and it curves? What's happening is the spin of the ball, right, is creating a vacuum with the air that it's flying through, and it causes the ball to fly through that vacuum based on the spin and rotation of the ball. It's called the Magnus effect. And you're like, but they're in space. It doesn't matter. They have the same atmospheric pressure inside of that tin can as we do at sea level. That's how that craft is designed. Again, we're going to make them own what they say is true. If this is the case, if that ball is spinning, it shouldn't stay in place at all. It should gyro in and out just like a curveball does. It should move. But we're going to take it a step further than that. It should move for another reason on top of that. You have a confined space with multiple people living in it. And you have to scrub the carbon dioxide in that cabin to create oxygen for your people to breathe, because as we said, there's not enough oxygen at that altitude to be able to do what they need to do. So how do you ventilate a spacecraft? Well, how do you ventilate your room? You open one window, you open another, it creates a draft ventilation. Well, same deal, only you're not opening a window. You're pulling a vacuum to get air from one end to another, and you're having an inlet at a different end of the chamber. And what does that do? Again, they're at the same atmosphere as sea level, right? It creates a draft, just like it would in your house. So nothing in the space station should ever be staying in place because, there's a little bit of air drag, as we've said, but the air current should be pushing them if they're experiencing the same effects as zero gravity, because they're technically not in zero gravity because they're falling. They're experiencing Earth's gravity. They're just falling constantly to give them the illusion of zero gravity, right? According to what they say. And again, we're just going to hold them to what they say. So, the ISS complete bullshit. Right? According to their science and math and physics, all of it. I'm going to let you make your own conclusions as to what that leads to, but there's something else we need to go over here. Right? The sun in the ISS, they experience 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets a day. Right? Now, none of those sunrises and sunsets display the red shift that you would experience on Earth. Now, as we've stated, they are still inside our atmosphere. Okay? They're not in space. But on top of that, the light that they are seeing is being lensed through our atmosphere, which has a bias towards showing red shift. Every sunrise and sunset they experience every day should appear almost the same way that it does to you and me on the surface of the earth as far as the way the color presents. The ISS never shows any of that. None of the footage, ever. It's rather interesting because you can apply the same concept to you standing on the earth and viewing the surface of the moon, right? So think about this. If the moon is reflecting the light of the sun, okay, and that light is being diffused through Earth's atmosphere, which has a bias towards showing you the red shift of the light, why are we not seeing the moon as orange or red or yellow? We should be. It should never be white. The only time you should see it as white is if you are in space. Again, we're just taking their science and making them own it. I don't have the answers as to why any of this is the case, okay? All I know is what they have told you doesn't make sense if you make them own their own nonsense to their own standards of nonsense. Okay? And this is where you can put back your belief, right? You can take off the logic cap and ask yourself the question, why? What incentive do they have to do this? I can't answer that question for you, and to be honest with you, I don't really know at this point, other than the fact that it takes power away from the religious institutions of the world. And not so much the institutions, right? But the manuscripts and our ancestors, and it just makes us seem insignificant. It makes all of the stories that you read about this being a closed system and unique just disappear. They go out the window. But at the end of the day, I don't know how to explain any of it, other than the fact what they tell us can't be happening based on what they tell us, which is probably bullshit, but that's all we have to go with at this point. And we all know that basic physics work. It's a fundamental thing that you experience every day. So, where do we go from here? I think the best course of action, to be honest with you, is to keep doing exactly this. Is taking what they say at face value, applying logic and basic principles of physics to it. And I think a lot of it will start to fall apart all on its own. And at the end of the day, we, as people who are looking for answers, need to stop holding ourselves to the standard of the world that we live in, okay? And this is a big trap that they want us to fall into. Why are we seeking the approval of people that have no interest in hearing us out sincerely? In all seriousness, that's a question that I'm not going to answer. Ask yourself that. Because it applies to more than just this conversation. It applies to a lot of things you experience in life, okay? Why do you spend so much energy caring about what the outside world thinks? Or what do you have to prove to the outside world? You haven't proven anything to yourself yet. And on that, I'm going to leave you. Thank you for being with me. Like I said, please like, share, subscribe. Have a blessed day and take care of yourselves.